Good evening. Welcome to week 3. So for computer programming, BMM1313. In your week 3, we will learn about variables, arithmetic operations, and math functions. But of course, chapter 3 and chapter 4 is interrelated because chapter 4 is pretty much the important part where you will do processing as Printf Scanf, so controlling of variables and things like that. Therefore, for chapter 3 and chapter 4, we will go through today, but of course there'll be 2 parts, which means for part 1 today, I will start with the basic variables first so that you can actually learn and understand how to declare variables for storing informations and so on. Okay. Right after looking into the definition of variables, I will show how do we actually use, assign, and manipulate variables. So once looking into that, then we will jump into chapter 4, where I'll be showing you on output and input. So we will start with the output first because that's the most simplest in terms of printf. So what I mean by output is basically to process your coding or statements to produce an output that is shown in the screen. So you can see it on the screen. So once we have learned that, then we will look at input. How do we get input from users by keyboard, things like that. So once we have completed chapter 4, then we will open back into chapter 3 and we will continue on arithmetic operations and math functions. But due to the limitation of time, and chapter 3 and 4 is meant per week basis. So we will start with variables, then we will go into input output. That's all for part 1 for today. Okay, so looking at this chapter, you can access the slides from Kalam. So I believe many of you have actually looked through the topics. So I will not spend much time on the slides because this is something that you can go through yourself. But I'll definitely highlight the important parts or information that you're required to learn. So for today, it will be variables. And I'll be showing what are variables and how do we type or assign and so on. Okay, so these are things that you can read through the slides. And yes, some important information that you should know. In C programming, we call these special characters. What do I mean by special characters? The parentheses, the ampersand, the percentage symbol, the curly bracket, the brackets, question mark, things like that are known as special characters, which means they actually as function in programming. So you can't just use them as a normal sentence. So it has functions for it. So you have to be careful with this. So you can actually refer to programmist.com for more information regarding the special characters. But of course, I will show in a demo a while later what are the special characters that's involved. Okay. Other than that, keywords. Okay, in programming, because you can type in or create your own variables name. So as long it's a text or anything that you can understand, yes, you can use, but it is limited, whereby these words or keywords shown in the screen here is basically reserved keywords, which means it has a function in C programming. Something like break, continue. Break is something that you will use during your control statement, which is switch case, things like that. So here goes the case. Char is basically the data type. It's a variable declaration. Decision statement like that, you will use like if, else, else if. Such keywords are used for selection. and then go to, it allows you to actually jump in from a line to another line just to execute particular lines. Double, float, int or integer, these are data type declaration and things like that. Okay, switch is the one used for the selection for switch case. While is for looping and things like that. Yep. So for more information, yes, of course you can Google these keywords. So do careful, but you don't have to worry because code blocks recognizes these keywords. So the moment you type keywords, it will automatically display the words in blue color. So you will know that it's a built-in keywords function. All right, so we will look into that. And then things like Printf Scanf, this is where it will be on chapter 4. I'll show you guys on the input output. Okay. And of course the variables. So variables, there are a few types. Okay. If you take a look here, declaration for variables. So in variables, you have integer for normal values, numbers without decimal places. Okay, it's integer. Char is basically for alphabet. Float is those with decimal places. So like currency, calculation, pi number, things like that. Difference between float and double, it's the same. The difference is basically double allows you to store a much larger value. So those are the differences. But don't worry about this. I will show you an example. So we'll be looking into that variables and then we will go into input output. Okay, so let's begin with the code blocks. So I'll start with variables as in chapter 3. So I will show you guys on variables. So for those who have already installed the code blocks, as you know, first part, create new project, select console, console application, and then select C, programming language. Project title is up to you. I'm just going to put it as lecture week 3. Next, this will be finished. And once you have done that, you'll be able to access the codes. So these are the standard libraries that I've explained previously on the past 2 lecture. Integer main, this is default. Every codes that you do or perform, you have to type it inside here. So basically things that you are going to do for the C programming is inside this curly bracket. The return, yeah, you don't have to disturb it. So you can just push it down and leave it there. Okay, so whatever you want to do, you will do it here. All right, so we'll start with variables first. So when we say about variables, it allows you to store information. Okay, so when we talk about information, anything, values, numbers, alphabets, percentage, all sort of things you can store. So there are few data type that you need to know. Okay, so the first one is integer. So this allows you to save numbers, values that are in decimal. So 1, 2, 3, 4, things like that. All right. So let's have an example. Integer is the data type. So what's the variable that I want to store those information? So I'm going to put it as number. So this is a variable name that you can customize. Hope you guys can see. So this is the name that you can customize. If you think you want to put in your name, it's fine. Yep, anything. But of course, because we are doing programming, codes are meant to be, I would say, for general programmers to understand. So we try to put variable, or we try to use variable names that represent whatever values that we are trying to save. So in my case, I want to save numbers. So my variable name would be number. So this is how we declare a number variable of a data type integer. So this can store numbers. I'll show you in a while. Okay, second is the data type called char. So what does char do is you can store alphabets. Please keep in mind it's just alphabets, so a single alphabet. So I'm going to store alphabet. All right, so that's my variable name, alphabet. So whatever I'm doing here is basically the declaration. So what else we have? Float. Float is something that allows you to store like price in Malaysia ringgit that has decimal places. So it can be declared as data type float. And let's put the variable name price. And another one, of course, is double, but you will not use this much unless you are working on, I would say, equations that requires you to store a really large values. Then you may use double. So double and float is the same. So in our case, yeah, we don't use much double. Float is sufficient for this course. Okay, so these are the three different data type. So what do I mean by these variables? What can it store? Let's take a look on that. So another thing besides char, if you want to store your name, then you require the char to be as an array. So how does name or array like for char is stored? Same char, put in the variable name. In my case, I want to save a name, and then I just have to add this bracket, this square bracket, and this will tell me how many alphabets am I able to store in this variable name. So usually I think most of us, our names are not more than 20 characters. So yeah, so we set a size of 20. So we're able to store 20. So this is basically variable declaration. Okay. So the second part is I'm going to show how do you store values. Right now we are just declaring. So this is variable declaration. Okay. So we just declare. So these variables are ready to be used, but it doesn't contain any information yet. So when we talk about storing information, we can initialize the value. That means before we get input from user, we can set the values in default. So how to do that? Once you put integer number, we will put equal sign, and then we assign what values or numbers that we want to store in this variable called number. So let's say 8. So this means this variable now has this value in it, number 8. So for alphabet, it's the same. We will use the symbol called this assignment, okay, or the equal sign. For char data type, we need to use the single quote. So what alphabet? Let's say Z or Z. Okay. So for single alphabet char, you have to use the single quote. But for name that stores a string, we need to use the double quote. Okay. So let's put my name. Okay. This is for string, so it can store up to 20 characters. At this moment, this is like 8, only 8. So it allows you to store up to 20. All right. So this one example. Float price. For float, this data type, it allows you to have decimal places. So let's assume 50.99. Okay. But of course, please do not use the MYR, USD, and so on, because it only allows you to store numbers. For the currency information, you can put it in your printf. So this is variable declaration, and this is initialization of the variable. So now let's take a look in terms of input output, but first we will look into output. So for variable declaration, the demo that I showed to you basically covers everything on the variables. Okay, you can read these slides. So now we will look into the input and output. So moving on to chapter 4. There'll be two parts. The first part is on output. So we will be using the keyword printf. So printf is for output and scanf is for input. So we will take a look in terms of displaying values or information on the screen. So printf allows you to display the information. So these are the parts that you can read. So I'm not going to bore you with this slide. Okay, so I'll be showing you a demo immediately in terms of output, which is printf. Okay, so let's take a look. Back to our code blocks. So when you want to output on screen, okay, what do I mean by output? Okay, when you run code blocks, this gear symbol is for you to build, for you to check, is there any errors? In our case, there's no errors, but just a warning because we are not using any of these variables yet. So it's just a warning. And click run. This is what I mean by output on screen. At this moment, because we did not do any commands related to printf, therefore you are not seeing any information on the screen yet. Okay, so let's take a look on output for printf. Double slash is meant for comment. This thing is not executed. So output. So the command or keyword for output is called printf. Printf, open close bracket, and then there's a semicolon. Please keep in mind that this will lead to errors if you miss your semicolon. Every line ends with a semicolon. Okay. So of course it depends on the situation. If your lines are longer, you have to take a look where's the ending of the statement. So for printf, the basic printf is basically to use this double quote, and whatever that you type in this area will be printed or will be output onto the screen. Okay, so I'm going to show you an example. So I'm going to just display the subject on the screen. So any symbols that you use inside this double quote will be printed as it is, except for the percentage, which I'll show on later. Okay, so let's give a try on this. So when I run this, compile and run, you can see exactly as what I typed. This is BMM1313 and it's computer programming. So everything is in the code will be displayed. So this is basically what's covered in this chapter for output. But of course, output for printf is not limited to this. So let me show you what are the things that you can do with printf. So in my case, I want to show that, okay, I want this line to be on the next line rather than on this single line. So in C programming, there are certain things that you can do, which is we call /n. And it's meant for new line. So if I type in this slash with n, and when I run, if you notice, whatever right after the /n will be pushed to a new line. So if I want another gap in between this line, I just have to add another /n. Okay, so this is for the formatting or output processing. So if I add like this, there'll be two new lines. So these are things that you can explore. Okay, as you can see here, now there's two lines, one line from here and then another. Okay, other than that, things that you can do with printf, you can tab, which is called /t. So if you do this, this allows you to put a tab, a single tab. What do I mean by tab? Let's take a look. This is the tab. So if you want to tab even more, then add more /t. When will you use this? Okay, this is basically when you want to format your output. You want to control the display and the look of your output, including the information. So you'll play around with /t and /n. things like that. So for more information, yes, feel free to Google. There's a lot of things you can do on the formatting, for the output formatting. So I'll leave it for you to explore. So we will continue on printing or output from the variables that we have created just now. All right. This is just the format. Okay, so I'm going to leave this. Let's see how it looks like. Okay, probably just another tab. And then I want some empty space. So two new line. Okay, so I'll leave that output. Okay, now we're going to look at printf, whereby we print or output the information that we have declared and store. So how do we do that? Same, printf, open close bracket, always don't forget your semicolon, and then the double quote. Okay, now this is the special part. For standard text that we output, we just leave it with this code. But if you want to output or display something that you have created, then you have to add a comma right after the double quote and place in the variable that you want to output to the screen. Okay, so in my case, I want to write here, this is the number which I would like to output this. Okay, so the thing you have to do is place in the variable, which is number. Okay, so you want to take this information and you want to output on the screen. But at this moment, if you run, nothing will be output because printf doesn't know where should I place this information on this text. That is where you will play with this character, okay, which is percentage. This tells you or tells the command where should you place this variable number. And for this command, it has few. Percentage D is meant for decimal. Percentage I is for integer. So in our case, we have integer, but usually we just leave it as D. Okay. And if you're outputting for char, which is alphabet, then it's percentage C because C stands for the character or char. And if you're outputting name, then you have to change this to S. S is for string. Okay, so please remember in printf, you have to be careful with this and also this. So for float, it's percentage F. Okay, and if it's double, then it's LF. Okay, these are things that you have to memorize. Of course, you can Google search, but don't worry, you'll get used to it once you start programming. Okay, so those are the information on the output. So in our case, okay, I would like to display the number. So it's a decimal, so D. So what happens here is when I execute or run this command, it will take the values from this variable and it will place exactly at this location. Okay, let me show you. If you take a closer look, this is the number 8. So 8 was the value that I stored on this variable. So when I call in, it will display the number 8, which is here. So you can play around with this because this allows you to actually move the output or the location of this value. Okay, what do I mean? Let me show you. If I take this, okay, I cut, I put it somewhere here. Okay, what happens now is this value will be placed at this location. See, the 8 is there. So printf allows you to format the location of the variables. But of course, this sounds a little bit not logic, but why they allow you to do this? Because there are certain times that you can have a long statement and you can have multiple variables that you can place. Before we move into that, let me show you the printf for all the other 4 types of variables. So you can just copy paste, you don't have to type this. So this is the alphabet. And for alphabet, because it's a character and it's from this variable, so I'm going to place it here. Okay. Next, I'm going to do for the name. So this is, let's change it. This is my name. So for name, it's string, more than one character. And the variable that I need to refer to is name. And lastly, it's for the price. So this is the price. And okay, since you're storing just values, right? And you want to declare this as Malaysian Ringgit, RM. So what you can do is basically place the RM here. So the values goes right beside this. So for float, it's F. Okay, so please remember, do not mix this up. D for integer, C for char without the bracket, S is for string, F is for float. So if I run this, I'll be able to see this on my screen, but it's going to look a little messy. What do I mean by messy? There you go. So it's going to look like this. So what we can do is basically, I would say, format it, and there's some mistakes here. Why? Because name is not float. Name is string. Float is price. So wrong variable. Okay. So since I'm going to format it a little pretty, so what I'm going to do is add a new line at the end of all this printf. So this will format the output the much pretty looking. So there you go. So this is number 8. It takes from here. This is for the alphabet Z or Z, and this is for the name, and this is for the price. So since you have done this, so now you have learned in terms of output of your own sentence and output from the variables. So what if I would
Sir,
like to, yes, sure.
so what will happen if I use string for character? For the
Uh,
alphabet, I didn't use percent character, but instead I used percent string.
percent string. You can try, but it usually comes up with error. See, if you change it to string, I run this, there'll be a formatting error, but it might be able to still produce. Nope, it didn't. So it's an error because it's expecting a sentence or a string, but then it's just a character. So it's unable. So it just stuck there. So to be safe, always remember that you have to use the exact type here. All right.
So
Okay. So
character
yep.
used for only one alphabet lah.
Yep. C is only for one
Am I-
alphabet. Yep.
Okay,
C is
thank you.
exactly for one. So it's like A to Z. You can only produce or use one alphabet. So if you want more than one, automatically you have to declare char and you have to specify how many alphabet that you want to allow the variable to store. And then you have to convert it to S, which is string. All right. So looking back on just now, what did I say I want to do? Let me take a look again. Okay. Here's another thing. Since we're already looking at output, if you notice on this variable, the value initialized is 50.99, but I'm getting 50.990002. Okay. In default, variables that you are declared allows you to store up to 6 decimal places. So how if you decide, no, I don't want to show all the 6. Okay. For that, there's also formatting. Let me show you. When we put this F, right, this will display all the 6 decimal places, but we want to limit only to 99. So in between, you put a dot and you specify how many. At this moment, I just want 99. 99 is just 2 decimal places, so 0.2. So when I do 0.2, it will convert the values from here to exactly as this. Let's take a look. There you go. So it will format it to 2 decimal places, 0.2. Of course, you can change even more. If you want to do rounding, say 99 or say 96 and 59, it will round for you actually. If you notice, 50.97. So it will round it up. Okay. So you can control the decimal places from here. So this is about output to screen based on the variable that you have declared. So now let's take a look of how if I would like to produce different output. What do I mean by different? While keeping this statement, output statement here, I'm going to change the values for this variable. So my number is 125 and my alphabet would be A, and I add up my full name, and probably I want this as 0.99. Okay, so what I have to do is just hit the run button. I don't have to change any of these commands or statements here because it will take from the exact variables. So when I run, I'll be able to produce the new values. Okay, so this is for variable declaration and output. But of course, this output is limited to variables that you have initialized in your code. So what about values that we want from the user? Okay, that is where we will continue and we will look into input. How do we accept input from user? Okay, so the command here or the keyword is basically scanf. Printf is to output on screen, scanf is to get input from the keyboard. So you can read this. The identifier is pretty much the same, okay, as printf. You can go through this. I'll just move on to the demo, okay. So that's for the input. So now let's take a look. So we have done output. Let's move in to input from user. So how do we do that? So now we will be using the same variables, yeah, so that you guys can see the changes from normal variable declaration and variables that we have initialized. And now we will look at variables where we get the input from the user. So first thing, of course, when you want to get input from user, you have to tell the user what do you need. So we will definitely start with the printf because we want to tell the user. So first, because we want to get the number, so we will tell the user, what do we tell? Please key in a value. Okay, so we inform the user, please key in a value. And then now we process the input. Input is scanf. Okay, same bracket, semicolon. And this is where it's important. For printf and scanf, you have this double quote. But for scanf, it is compulsory to have the comma and which variable do you want to store the input from. Okay. In our case, we're asking key in a value, right? And we want to store it in this variable number. So we will type in number. Okay. But always remember this because students tend to make mistake. For printf, if you look at this, the statement is pretty much, it looks alike with scanf, but there's one key important, I would say, command, which is ampersand. This is required for scanf. Every time you are performing scanf, where you would like to get the input from the keyboard from the user, you need to put this symbol ampersand right in front of the variable. Okay, why? Okay, there's a reason for this. Ampersand actually tells this function the memory address of this variable. It's a bit complicated because in our case, we are just looking at the word number, right? But this number, it's stored in your RAM, in your computer RAM, in one particular area, which we call address. So the location of the memory can be retrieved by using this keyword or symbol ampersand. Okay, so you don't have to know that. There's no exam question asking you what's ampersand, but just remember for scanf, you're required to use this. Okay, so what are the input type that we're asking from user? Integer value, so same, decimal. So once you have done this, what happens is that this line will accept input from the keyboard from the user until the user hit the enter button, okay, from the keyboard. So we'll take a look on that. But of course, once we get the input, let me show you. What do I mean? Close this first. When I run, okay, please key in a value. At this moment, the coding is at line 21, okay, and then when the cursor blinks, it has moved to line 22, whereby it's waiting. Scanf is waiting for the input from us. So what's the number that we are going to put? Say 9. Okay. Scanf will end the moment I hit the enter button on my keyboard. But in our case, we won't know where the 9 is because I only get the input and I haven't processed it. So if I hit the enter button, the program completes successful. But we don't know is this 9 being stored or not. So in order to check whether this value is assigned to this variable, we have to print that variable. So how are we going to do? We already asked the user to input, but keep in mind, we declared it as 125, but then now the user is going to override this. So how do we confirm that? We copy this line. This is to display what's on the variable, right? We just copy and we place it right after the scanf. But we change the statement or else this is going to look same. So this is the value keyed by the user. Okay. So let's keep this on new line. And then I run this. So this is from the previous. Now key in a value. So whatever value that I'm going to key in will be stored in this variable, and then we will view what's the value that the user type in. So let's put 99. Oh no, let's keep something else. 34. Enter. So then you get, this is the value keyed by the user, which is 34. So this variable will no longer store this value called 125, because in this case, we already override the variable. Okay. So this is how you perform scanf or input from the keyboard from the user. Okay. So let's proceed with the remaining for the alphabet, name, and the price. So I no longer want to display this. So I'm going to use the comment function to hide this. And I'm going to proceed with input from user. So I'm going to reuse my code. So yeah, I'm going to copy and paste. So please key in a character. So character is C, and where do I store it? In alphabet. So I'll paste it in alphabet. So this is the character keyed by the user. It's a character, so it's C. And where do I get the information from? Alphabet. Okay. Next, I'll do it same for name. So please key in, what do you want the user to do? Key in your name. Name is a string because it's more than one alphabet, and it's in this variable name, and this is the name keyed by the user, string, and from variable name. And finally, for float. So we'll copy this, paste it here. Please key in the price. Okay, it's a float and it's in the variable price. Okay, so this is the price keyed by the user, and of course we want to put it save USD. Yeah, I can just put USD and float. And if you want to format it to only 2 decimal places, then 0.2. And the variable price. Okay, so we will run these codes and let's take a look. Okay, so at this moment we are in line 21. Okay, so please key in a value and I would like to put 77. Enter. So the value key in is 77. Please key in a character. Oh, oops, you did skip. Did I enter too fast? Let's put some other name. Okay. Okay, it did skip too fast. So in that case, let's do it one by one. I'm going to lock this. Okay. And I'm going to lock this. Sometimes code block has these issues where it might skip. So you can use, if at all, if you face the same issues like me, if it's too fast, you can add this library. Okay. And you can put get character. Okay. This will avoid it from skipping, but sometimes it will skip also, but yeah, it depends. If it skips again, then we have to look for another solution. Okay, please key in a character, say D. So this is the character keyed by the user, D. All right. Okay. So we will check next on the name. I'm gonna close here, and I'm gonna open here. So close this. This is a function for commenting. It starts with slash asterisk and it ends with asterisk slash. Okay, so run this. Say Mohammed. And then you get the output for what you've keyed in. Okay. And then finally, for the float, cut this. I'm going to close it here and I'm going to remove this and remove this. So price, since I'm going to put USD, so 45.678, and it should format for me up to 2 decimal places. So I should get 45.68. So there you go. So this is for Scanf for input from user. Okay, so basically, yeah, that's all for your lecture today. So we have completed your lecture. We have learned on the variables. Okay, we have learned about variables, the declarations. I've showed you all possible data type variables. Okay, and then we have looked into input and output. So we have seen into printf, how to do printf, and also we have looked into scanf. Okay, feel free to go through the slides. The slides have step-by-step details. You'll be able to see the instruction and so on. Okay, so this is for your reference for you to read. Okay, Do keep in mind in terms of this, for double is LF, which is long float, okay? So the format specifier and things like that. So that's basically for input and output. So I've shown you completely. So since we have completed chapter 4, so we'll be back to here. And on next week, I'll proceed with operators and also the math functions, because during operators and math functions, you should be able to use your input output, which is printf and scanf. So processing related to that will be shown in this topic.